Computer Art Society talk. This is our regular series. We try to have one per month during the sort of peak season, and then I think we have a little bit of time off over the summer. Today's talk, we have two speakers, and we're going to be looking at text generation, art and writing. And of course, AI is a significant part of this now. But the two people involved in tonight's talk have been doing text generation long before the current generation of AIs came along. So I think it should be a really interesting session, because we will be getting some early work and as well as reflections on contemporary practice as well. So I am going to do a brief introduction. So we have David Link, who is a freelance artist, and we have Geoff Davis, who is a member of the Computer Art Society organising committee and an artist himself. How about Geoff, if I hand over to you to do a introduction, and I'll be sitting here in the background just to monitor the session to make sure everything goes smoothly.
Today's talk is called An Unexpected Story and concerns AI text, literature, poetry and text art. We'll also look briefly today at AI in the publishing industry, which I think is got some interesting reactions given what's happening at the moment in AI in the arts. So this evening we'll look at programmed art that's sometimes labelled AI, although not in the modern commercial sense of large language models that currently dominate discussion. There are many kinds of AI art, and some of the work we'll discuss uses procedural and generative systems developed long before today's commercial platforms, which Sean just mentioned. I'll be showing some of my own AI-related artworks, and then David Link will discuss his famous poetry machine, which has been internationally exhibited and used for music works and so on. He'll go into that quite a lot of depth later. I'm just going to do a very short intro and then have a look at some of my own work. Now, the next part is called AI Backlash. Now, I don't know whether anybody's been following, but there's certainly a change in mood at the moment about how the public discourse is going around current AI systems. So there seems to be a significant backlash, particularly within creative industries. Artists, writers, musicians increasingly argue that AI systems are damaging livelihoods through copyright issues, imitation and automation. There are also concerns about environmental costs, labour issues, concentration of power, misinformation, general effects of algorithmic culture. Critics range from artists and publishers to AI researchers themselves. I mean, I follow a lot of them, but Gary Marcus is a very influential figure, very important figure. And he's becoming part of this backlash now. Although he's been criticising the industry for a long time on a more technical level. Now he's sort of in this backlash, I'd say, some of his recent things. Freak magazine, which is with a PH, of the Freaking Collective. Now they're fairly well known on the underground scene. Even they, in their new magazine, have called for a reset of an evolving computational climate that's becoming more and more hostile to its users and want to reclaim digital sovereignty. So there is this issue that things are, along with social media, the way that those platforms have been affected by AI slop and bots and all sorts of everything else. It's a kind of bit of doomy kind of feel. So we get in our house the Society of Authors magazine. So we have this magazine, and it's always full of quite anti-AI articles, really, criticising this and criticising that. Just in the last issue, UK Society of Authors launched something called Human Authored. It's an initiative arguing for clearer distinctions between human and AI-generated writing. There are also other campaigns focused on copyright, consent, compensation, the training data, and so on. But this is not what I'm talking about right now. It's just this sort of industry, publishing industry and writing industry related initiative. Now, the part of the problem is that AI systems were trained by scraping enormous quantities of online material. So while companies argue that AI companies argue it's legal, many creators feel they've been absorbed into commercial systems. So this is slightly different from earlier internet disruptions. File sharing, streaming, damaged income models for music and publishing. But now the modern AI systems have introduce a new issue. Generated material can now imitate or replace aspects of the original creative work itself. Now, with the Society of Authors, to get back to that, it's a very interesting example because their proposal allows AI to use, well, their basic idea is that you have a sticker or a digital sticker that you put on your book saying human authored. And you could argue, of course, that's the wrong way around. It should be that the generated stuff has the sticker, but they've got this approach now of so writers can claim that their work is human authored. And I've heard cases of writers who live stream themselves writing for days on end, weeks, months, in order to prove that everything they do is like in their own writing studio. The human authored website says that AI use is okay for brainstorming, outlining, and research, but not for generating the final prose, which that immediately raises lots of questions, because obviously a huge amount of creative work goes into these brainstorming, outlining sessions. And the actual writing might be at the end of a very long planning session that you've used a lot of AI to, but they don't seem to be bothered about that. And I have started communicating with them, which I'll talk about as well. There are other issues with AI in publishing, which aren't just to do with the actual words on the page. Translation is a big issue that is now being automated, which putting lots of people out of work. Also, audiobooks can be voiced automatically now at minimal cost, whereas usually audiobooks are quite expensive to do. Well, translation is also expensive. So there's a big demand for these services. So in some ways you can argue that's a good thing, unless you're a translator or a voice artist. So I contacted them and I just asked them, just got a dialogue going, and I said, what would you make of my own generated system from the old one, 1985, which is entirely my own work. All the words in it are mine. The seed story is mine. Individual words that I used in the data banks of words are all mine. But it's generated. The text is put together by a computer, and they didn't have no idea how to respond to that. They'd kind of never heard of it before. So that was interesting that they had so little knowledge of the AI in its even fairly recent history, and yet they're busy putting out bans and things and telling people what to do. So they just said it was too complicated to think about. So I let, basically that is what they said. Didn't understand, go away. But I'm going to keep on at them, and I will write it up on the CAS website. So I think it's quite an important issue that these things are defined. Otherwise, there'd be some huge backlash against all sorts of things that are going on. But the other interesting thing is that I do and some of you might know this from previous chats I've done here, the AI creative anthologies. There's 2 already from 2023 to 2024. Now, the publisher who does those is a small indie publisher. And now they don't want to do them anymore, and they want them off their website because they're worried that there are other published books, which are fiction, memoirs, cookbooks, all sorts of things, exercise books, but they don't want AI to be associated with it. So we're going to start a new kind of imprint that's totally separate from them, and then move it on and then do the 3rd AI anthology, which is in preparation when I eventually get around to it this year. Will come out on this new imprint called, art books or something, because I think the fine art world is quite positive about AI. But the sort of traditional publishing world is definitely not very keen. And there's a book called Shy Girl, which was a huge disaster because it was published and then withdrawn because there was some AI, quite a lot of AI content apparently in it. And the writer has had their career sort of destroyed by using tools that everybody uses all the time. The art world has accepted AI and other digital tools going forward, from Paintbox and Quantile Paintbox, Photoshop in the 1980s. I mean, that's when all the arguments took place in the art world, I think, when these tools appeared that could change a photograph or completely make up new images and new animations from existing material. So it's been discussed for longer in the art world than it has in the writing world, I think. Although David might disagree, I don't know. There's a long history to this sort of material. Fine-tuning is when you use a modern AI system with a big model, and you can load your own material into it, and it will only refer to your own material, such as you put a couple of novels that you've written, if you had them, into it, or lots of images that are your own images, maybe a few thousand of your own photographs or something, and it will come up with your type of work. And people like Anna Ridler, Kevin of Bosch use this sort of thing quite a lot to create their own personalized AI images. I will now move on to my art. So the first thing to talk about is Story Generator. Now this was back in the 80s when I founded and ran and did most of the programming for MicroArts, which some of you might know about. I did a story generator because I had actually been published before I did MicroArts in fiction published by PEN, who were a London sort of literary organisation. By some miracle, I got into one of their books, and so I was kind of more interested in writing in some ways. But MicroArts seemed like a really good idea, so I started it and did mainly sort of conceptual graphical work and a lot of odd things. But in 1985, I did a story generator. Okay, this pioneering text generation software creates unsettling variations on the original base story, which I'd written previously. The topic was animal insurrection triggered by human-caused disease. It was released on MicroArts. It was actually distributed on the Prestal teletext network, very early net art as well, I suppose, with all the other software. And it was exhibited at the time at the London Filmmakers Co-op. So there was this sort of underground scene that I was part of, and nobody was doing computer work, so I did all these computer things. And the story generator came out, was exhibited, was reviewed in magazines like Computer News, Sinclair News, the Blitz magazine, which was more of a fashion mag. But MicroArts had no gallery connection. So all this groundbreaking digital art was lost to art history until rediscovered by Sean Clark of CAS and the Computer Arts Archive in 2020. So that's very fortuitous, really. So anyway, this generator replaces words from my original story, Cow Boils Head, which was a kind of fairly weird story about animal rebellion, with themed synonyms generating new narratives at a hypnotic pace. The generator was written in Sinclair Basic on the ZX Spectrum. The work emerged during Britain's BSE crisis, which was bovine encephalitis, practice of feeding cattle with processed animal remains, which led to mad cow disease. So I transformed this animal pandemic into a series of dark procedural fictions with different species, wolves, vultures, lizards, etc., rise up against humanity. And I'll just run this now, because that's why I'm showing the screen. Now, this is the title. This is where it starts with this flashing. And you see the text appears, sort of scrolls down the screen in a very nice pace to it. So it's just about the right speed to read. And then the stories are pretty randomized, so they're all quite strange, but they're all based on the original structure of the first short story, just changing the parts around. Now, that was a very popular method before people thought up machine learning. And it's kind of the basis of an expert system. It's all coded. Everything's coded into it. But this did have the randomizing. So all the stories are different. Now, this video goes on for nearly an hour, and each story takes about a minute. So there's quite a lot of stories here. This is online on the MicroArts YouTube channel. Anybody wants to look at it? It had just to make it more lively, I put priests and vicars and whatnot in it. And one of the early showings of this, somebody, it's actually a friend's father, watched it, and he was so angered by the bizarreness of it all and the priests and vicars that were plunging into hell or whatever they happened to be doing in the story, that he developed this massive nosebleed and had to be taken off to A&E. So that was a remarkable effect of this fiction. Disordered fiction is still kind of a challenging concept, I think. It goes right back to the beats with cut-out fiction. So between doing MicroArts and doing what I'm doing now, cyberpunk novel, we had a computer game for it. This was on the Arts Council CD-ROM. After that, I had another book out, which had 3D modelling for the illustrations. I had an online site for it. I've always been working with artists, even if I'm not doing the artwork myself. Now, Pattern City is the new work from 2023. This was shown in the 2023 CAS committee members art exhibition. And this was the first version. So you can see this is a grid of images with text coming on top. It was sort of inspired by a book called Pattern City, a novel which is finished in about 2016 or so. This was the still that was in the exhibition. Now the second version of it, I decided to sort of make it a bit more cheerful. It's colour for a start, and I'll just run that. And this animation this time was run at the 2025 Drivers Exhibition at BCS in London again with Computer Art Society. And this was about I think I had a 20-minute video running there. Now these grid sizes can change. And this is all software. There's like a program that runs the art images. So it can do various types of grids, it can change the speed, it can do color overlays. And all of this is set up in the program, and then it can just run continuously with sort of randomized images slightly, or it can be completely randomized. So you'll see that it's moving along. It's a good system to use for all sorts of things. The flickering images I quite liked, where it overlays the generated images and then you get the strange effect. You know, it's not as grim and depressing as the first series I did. And maybe I should liven up the book a bit as well. But so this work has actually been shown. I mean, the book isn't out yet. The book is still sitting on the hard drive, and it's been edited by a couple of people now to make it more commercial, whatever. And it will eventually come out. Again, there's this problem that it's a kind of AI related. So that's the two pattern cities, the older one and the newer one. Now, this is a new piece I'm doing, which is called Studio Walk and Talk. And this grid pattern that walks itself is an old idea from 1984. And I was doing some recoding, which I think David's going to talk about recoding. I recoded most of my old work, which was Sinclair Basic, into P5, which is, well, it's basically JavaScript. It's gradually filling up the screen. And now this text in it can either be generated, or I put a reprogrammed, recoded version of the text generator into this graphics program. It can either do generated text to be a bit sort of crazy, but go on forever, or you can put a set text. And this one also has music on it. It generates tones as well. Okay, so this menu has all sorts of settings. It's like an app, make text art. So, okay, that's my experience with computers and text. So I think we're going to hand over to Dr. David Link, who's done a lot of this kind of work. And has even recoded the original 1952 love letters, which is astounding. I'm sure David will tell you all about that.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to present my work at the Honorable Computer Arts Society. And I will tonight talk about three works of mine. First, a text-generating installation work by the name of Poetry Machine from 2001. Then another installation that also generates text, the Love Letters installation from 2009. I will then read from a book I published in 2024, completely computer generated, but as I will argue, also with a human in the loop, because I don't think it makes sense to purely computer generate works of art. There's always a human factor involved, so it doesn't make sense to strictly separate the two realms, in my view. And finally, if we still have time, I shall play an audio sample of a work I did together with FM Einheit, a vinyl record by the name of Radar Angels, which appeared in 2019. So first, Poetry Machine. Poetry Machine is an installation, as I said, and it has been shown in the last 20 years. So I created it in 2001, and in the last 20 years it has been shown on festivals and in museums internationally. And the original idea of Poetry Machine was to write an algorithm that not only surprises an audience for some time, but an algorithm that is able to surprise the author of the algorithm himself. And for this, in my view, is what you need is a generative algorithm, because only in this way you can continuously generate new output that keeps surprising even the author of the algorithm. And I will show a short video of Poetry Machine to give you an impression. I hope you can all see it. There's no sound because Zoom has a problem with me talking and the sound of the video. What you see here is what is at the core of Poetry Machine. These are semantic networks. So words are connected by connections that have a certain strength. And this is what text is transformed in Poetry Machine. And this is also what is used then to generate text in the installation. So there's an encoder and a decoder in Poetry Machine. And the system autonomously informs itself in the internet. There is in the back a text screen that you can see now, where text runs continuously, and the text that runs there is always new and never repeats. And there's the ghost keyboard, a normal computer keyboard with the keys moving as if by a ghost's hand. So the text on the screen is actually written by nobody, if you want. And so the text keeps always changing and is always new. And the reason for this is the semantic networks in Poetry Machine. So here we see how the system searches for information on apocalypse. This is actually the installation as it was exhibited for several years in ZKM Karlsruhe at the Center of Media Arts. So these structures get quite dense with time, and there's a distance meter on the keyboard that sees you when you approach the keyboard and leaves you place to enter your own thoughts into the keyboard, and then the system starts associating from the input that you just made. And here you can read a bit of the text, but I will read some more text of Poetry Machine later, so this is just to give you a short impression. So this is an overview of Poetry Machine. So in the back you see the text screen, in front the ghost keyboard, and on the left is the plasma screen with where you can follow the search process in the internet. And Poetry Machine starts with an empty database originally, and it then searches its own database for concepts it doesn't know much about. It goes out into the internet to search for information on this concept and then transforms the material found into semantic networks. And this is one semantic network in Poetry Machine. So what you have is there are different words, and the words have different interconnections of different strengths. And so, for example, if Poetry Machine encounters the nice sentence, "An engineering communication theory is just like a very proper and discreet girl accepting your telegram," it will mark everything that is purely syntactical in this sentence. So, for example, "an" is just like, and so on. And the remaining semantically meaningful words like engineer, communication, theory, and so on are recombined into a semantic network. So the counter between telegram and communication, communication and girl, and so on is raised by 1 every time this couple is encountered in close semantic neighborhood. And if the system is capable of determining the word type of every word in the sentence, then also this sentence is transformed into a syntactical frame. So for example, a verbing noun, noun is just like a very adjective and adjective noun verbing your noun. And then if somebody, for example, enters communication into poetry machine, we shoot energy into the semantic network on the communication node, and the energy flows along the strongest connections. So for example, it would find girl and engineer, and it would then search for this semantic material, a fitting syntactical frame in its database, fit the content into the frame, and put this on screen. And then it would regard the output as new input, so it would associate from this last sentence output as if this was input, unless it is interrupted by the user. And you will have noticed already that this system is very much like the nowadays large language models. I regard it as an artistic precursor of the large language models. So what do the two systems have in common? First, the internet is the source of information for both systems. Both systems have an encoder-decoder architecture, which means there's a part that analyzes training material, and there's another part that generates new sentences out of the rules that it determined in the input material. It builds up, like a large language model, an internal representation of its knowledge. And there's a strong focus on the connection of words in both systems. But the difference between large language models and poetry machine is that poetry machine does not aim to simulate human utterances in a perfect way. It's an incomplete system, and it's very important for this system that it's incomplete. It only analyzes one certain aspect of language use, namely the associations of meaningful tokens in human utterances, and leaves out a lot of other aspects, whereas large language models perfectly simulate, and this is also an astonishing breakthrough, so I do not want to make this breakthrough appear smaller than it is. This is really a tremendous breakthrough, but poetry machine is essentially an incomplete system. So I would call it a machine for the generation of unknown metaphors and metonymies. The next project starts with this computer output. This is the love letters algorithm by Christopher Strachey from 1952. And this is the only remaining printout of the love letters algorithm. And I will read this letter to you. It's, darling love, you are my avid fellow feeling. My affection curiously clings to your passionate wish. My liking yearns for your heart, my tender liking. You are my wistful sympathy. Your, and now it should actually go on something like yours anxiously, MUC, for Manchester University Computer. But unfortunately, the program crashed in this moment. And you can see also here above that the program crashed. And this is because the machines at the time were highly unreliable. This algorithm was executed on the Ferranti Mark I that was installed in Manchester University in 1951. And the the Ferranti Mark I was the first industrially produced computer worldwide, and it was based on the Manchester Mark I, which evolved out of the Manchester Baby, which executed its first calculation in 1948, which makes it the first fully electronic stored program computer in the world. And this computer, as you can see, was highly unreliable, so you could hardly, at this particular moment, hardly execute very simple algorithms like this one. And I heard about this algorithm in Andrew Hodges' excellent biography of Alan Turing. There I read that Turing and Christopher Strachey amused themselves with trying the computer to create love letters. And even more thrilled was I when I found out that the complete source code of this algorithm was preserved in Bodleian Library in Oxford. And I organized the source code in Bodleian Library. And unfortunately, I had to realize that it was impossible to understand the essence of algorithms, because this is arguably one of the very first algorithms in human history. So I thought that it was possible to understand more about the essence of algorithms by studying this particular algorithm. And I had to realize that the programming language was so primitive at the time, much worse than today's assembler, for example. It was Manchester opcodes, that it was impossible to follow this program through simply by reading it. What you can find out by reading it is that a number is written from store 1 to store 2, and then from store 2 to store 3, and so on, but you will never be able to comprehend the meaning of the complete algorithm. So the only possibility was to write an emulator of the Manchester Mark I. And for this, it was very helpful that there were schematics like this one in the material of Christopher Strachey. So this is the general schematic of the love letters generator. A random value is generated, and then the system follows two pathways. Depending on the random value, it generates sentences of the form, "You are my adjective noun," or "My adjective noun adverbial verbs, your adjective noun." And it repeats this 5 times, and then comes the "yours anxiously," or so, MUC. So this was the general overview of the algorithm, but it didn't allow me to follow the algorithm through. So the only possibility was to write an emulator of the Ferranti Mark I. So this is the only remaining color photo of the Ferranti Mark I's console. And you see here different radar screens with bit patterns on them. And this is, yeah.
We can't see the computer. Yes, we can now.
Oh, I think we can. Yeah, I can see it.
It's come on mine now.
Yeah, there's a slight delay. I'm aware of that. So there's a bit pattern on these radar screens. And this is not a computer screen, what you see here in the middle, but this is the storage means of the Ferranti Mark I. And this was also at the time the only storage means for computers. So these are modified radar tubes common from the Second World War, and they have been modified in such a way that the bit pattern on them was refreshed continuously, so the radar tubes were able to store information. And there are a lot of the typical British post office switches on the console. And I decided to write an emulator of the machine with the help of the several handbooks that exist for the machine, and with a lot of work and a lot of difficulties because parts of the program were missing. I finally managed to run the love letters algorithm on my emulator. But then I realized that it was hardly known by the scientific community that the Manchester Mark I was the first computer. Many people thought that the American ENIAC was the first computer, or the computers by the German engineer Konrad Zuse. And so I decided to mark this milestone of computer development. I decided to build a memorial of this machine, and this is the Love Letters installation in 2009. Love Letters was shown in Arnolfini, Bristol in the UK, and also came finally home to Manchester, where the Manchester Mark I was conceived, in Manchester Art Gallery, but it was also shown on Documenta 13 in Kassel in Hong Kong, Australia. So this has been shown a lot. And as you can see here, we simulated the Williams tubes with radar tubes, also from the Second World War, and we meticulously rebuilt the console, but we took the artistic freedom to rip the tubes for aesthetic reasons out of the box, and we're hanging them above the console. So we built electronics to drive the radar tubes, and they run with a voltage of 1000 volts. So it's highly risky to touch anything here. Here you see the bit pattern on the radar tubes. And the output means, because there was no computer screen, the output means of this machine was a teleprinter, also common from the Second World War. So radar tubes were used for radar, obviously. The teleprinter was used for military communication, and both were components that were well tested and was well known how they worked. So they were reused when the first computers were built. And so every output of the computer program, to make it visible to the user, was printed on the teleprinter. And so also the love letters were printed and are printed in the installation in continuous intervals in the installation. And because they are so beautiful, I will read two specimen love letters. Dear sweetheart, my little yearning clings to your dear fervor. My liking passionately cherishes your fond ardor. You are my loving sympathy. My charm avidly woos your yearning. You are my lovely rapture. Yours wistfully, MUC. Or jewel duck, you are my affectionate fancy. My tender hunger seductively cherishes your sweet fondness. My covetous fancy lovingly pines for your precious enthusiasm. My eagerness pants for your dear yearning. You are my devoted affection. Yours anxiously, MUC. And this is actually an example of what I would call variable scripts. So you have a sentence structure and you fill different variables into it. And mathematically, it's possible to generate a lot of variety using this principle. But in fact, you will already have noticed that the love letters tend to repeat after a very short time. So this is actually the difference between pre-scripted systems and generative systems. And yeah, I think this is the important difference. Pandaemonium, that was completely computer generated, was published in 2024. And the original is in German. I generated the text in English. It was published in German, so I translated it to German. I still look for an English publisher for the English original. And as you all know, Pandaemonium is the capital of Hell in John Milton's epic, capital of Hell in John Milton's epic poem Paradise Lost from 1667. And from my view, I was more thinking of the original meaning of Pandaemonium, which is Greek, and it means all demons. And the idea was to have all possible demons or all possible thoughts in one book, and this is why I picked the title Pandaemonium. Actually, the title was proposed by Poetry Machine itself, as I found out later. After I had picked Pandaemonium, I encountered some of the lyrics I generated for an earlier project, and one of the titles of the lyrics was actually Silver Pandaemonium, and this is what I had in my head for some reason. I didn't realize it at the time. And you will notice soon that this is an example of machinic poetry, so text that cannot be generated otherwise, especially not by humans. This is machinic text, and it has a strangeness that marks the text as something alien. And so this alienation of everyday contexts is also a technique that human poets use when they create poetry. So this is not something that is particular to only machines. This is also what humans do if they create poetry, but naturally in a different way. And since this is an incomplete system, what is needed is a human in the loop. So the system generates a lot of mediocre output apart from stuff that is really interesting. And so to select and to mark content that is interesting, there needs to be a human that collages this into the final artistic product. And this is what I did with Pandaemonium. So there has been going on quite a selection process to create this book. And it's questionable if using a machine to write this book really saved me a lot of time, because it also took me almost a year to write this book. And so there's an imperfection to this algorithm, and this imperfection reminds me of the famous saying of Nam June Paik, who said, "If too perfect, dear God, angry." And this means if something is too perfect, then it's very difficult to make something interesting out of it. So in my view, using large language models to create artistic works is quite difficult, because the large language models are so perfect. So you need some kind of incompleteness to be able to work really with the material and to be able to create something interesting. And one last remark before I read a bit from the Pandaemonium. At the time, I thought when I created Poetry Machine that I don't have a copyright problem, because no part of the input of Poetry Machine searched from the internet appears in the output, because the generation process is word-based. And I thought this was sufficient so that I wouldn't get any problems copyright-wise with my system. And I have to realize that these were the happy times of the years 2000, because nowadays exactly this process is very much problematized, and a lot of people think that it's not fair use to use content in the internet in this way. And in this way, it gets very difficult to create artistic works that use generative means, obviously. So I will shortly read from the English version of Pandaemonium. These are song lyrics that were generated in different musical projects I did, and the text is called "This Is What I Bring." Even though she was gone, and I thought I was strong, she would nag on. I roil the pailful in the warm midsummer. This is what I bring. Yeah, this is what I bring. The nice meatloaves. The respect is the repetition of the radical and its end. The flower, the life, the penetration. All bone is tent crystal, feather or sew. The flowers, purple blues. It may be backscattered with a thin value, given a dry pixel. He corresponded at first to backscatter to the dry image, so they had nothing but values for their pixel, meant thin images. The exposure of the fertilization is the flower of the unfavorable multitude and its flower. Use dark and delicious blondes. The hair tangles the hard arch. The dish is the breadth of the neck and its hand. Bent is the nipple of the deep mouth that smiles. And not only may we plant all the will of flower, but we may do all the will of pollen. The playmate cries the old year. But pure dancing is true. But why is this life so pure? It lives free to me. You journey me, life. Shoulder, yellow handkerchief. From moment to sleeve, wearing, showing. She stuffs. The full bum of the lovely song. Whole feeds the taper. When it is wicked, however, it is wild. The life says the cock of the sister. Beauty is an energy of my young wisdom and strength. There are low cycles on the half entropy. The amplitude psi's. First, no such entropy as a radius radiation elapses. This is the psi that points with finite singularity. He is half because he becomes whisper. Was the cycle infinite or constant? Operator, human, models, very large, wasted. Infinite curvature in time. These slow churches are not the only bells who have shrunk. Rather, there can be a sonic speech which each inscription can resemble into him or herself. Move before a wave, I am the voice resembled, but how shall I sound you? Profound associate colors, white rainbow. When the symbol considers stuff, the maypole is colored as well. From the get signal, engineer call valves. Yeah, so this is Pandaemonium, and it was actually generated when I wrote it. I selected for each chapter a topic and a source of input words. So, for example, literary words by William S. Burroughs or Heiner Müller. Also scientific works like The Theory of Communication by Shannon. Texts on wildfires and floods. And also, for example, song lyrics like Bob Dylan's Hard Rain. And I picked words from this source material and entered it into Poetry Machine, and then saw what came out of the algorithm. And then, as I said, selected in a very tough way what came out of Poetry Machine to create the final book. And the last thing I would like to play to you is a cooperation with the famous musician FM Einheit from the well-known German industrial band Einstürzende Neubauten. It's called Radar Angels. It's a vinyl record that was released in 2019. And for this I hope this is going to work. I'm sharing now audio and I don't talk anymore. And I'm playing Radar Angels.
There are low cycles on the half entropy. The amplitude psi's. First, no such entropy as a radiation elapses. This is the psi that points with finite singularity, which becomes everybody with it and with themselves, forgets indifferent to itself. He is half because He becomes whisper. Was the cycle infinite or constant operator? Human models, very large wasted. Lane sounds in, sonic lane sea sounds, and the sea who we move to be ear from decrees. This voice sounds from the woman of metaphor. He is half because he becomes whisper. Was the cycle infinite or constant operator? Human models, very large wasted. Rather, there can be a sonic speech, which each inscription can resemble into him or herself. Move before wave, I am the voice resembled. But how shall I sound you? He is half because he becomes whisper. Was the cycle infinite or constant operator? Human models, very large wasted. Bass tenors and sparing bottoms have been inserted. Tenor, section, suppressor, and so completely. New bottom mounts to fit distortion. They too often make figure human instead of half. Because he becomes whisper. Was the cycle infinite or constant operator? Human models, very large wasted.
Thank you very much for your interest.
Well, that's fantastic. Yes, thank you both very much indeed. So we have time, maybe 15, 20 minutes for questions. So I think the best thing to do is to maybe, well, I guess you can raise your virtual hand, can't you, on the, there we go. Yeah, so I have Marina, for example, just raising a virtual hand. Did you have a question you wanted to ask? You can maybe unmute and ask your question.
Hello, sorry, I didn't realize I was raising my hand. I've actually, I mean, David said an interesting thing that LLMs are too perfect now to have gaps or incomplete or make mistakes. And I was wondering whether you've tried getting them to hallucinate in order to produce unexpected connections.
Oh yeah, I've actually tried two things. The first thing that you can do to make a large language model more creative is to raise a certain parameter called the temperature. So if you set the temperature of a model very high, it doesn't predict the most probable token, but is more flexible in what it considers probable. But what comes out of this is mostly not very poetic or creative text, but erroneous text.
Right.
So it simply stops making sense, because I had to realize when working with large language models that what we see if we talk to ChatGPT is the polished output of a huge work process, and that actually these models are very fragile. So if you, for example, if you tune a model that is already tuned, you add information to it, what might happen is what the scientists call catastrophic forgetting. So suddenly the model forgets everything it was knowing before, and it doesn't work anymore. So the other possibility is fine-tuning a model. I was trying to fine-tune, I think, the Llama model by Meta by the text of Pandaemonium, although it's not a lot of text for a large language model. I succeeded in fine-tuning this model with Pandaemonium, and it turns out that suddenly the system forgets everything it knows about perfect simulation of human utterances, and it starts to speak very similar to the output of Poetry Machine.
Okay.
So these are very preliminary experiments.
Yeah, so you're still experimenting.
I'm still experimenting, but probably it's a better idea to write an algorithm yourself than to try to tune these perfect models. But this depends naturally on what you want to accomplish.
I mean, can everybody hear?
Yes.
Okay. I had a similar problem with using AI models before ChatGPT arrived. There was ChatGPT 2 was around, plus ChatGPT 2. Also, open source models were around, ChatGPT-J and a few other ones. And I worked with somebody called Francis Bellard, who's quite well known in the open source area. And he let me use his online system called Text Synth, exactly as that sounds, text and then like a synthesizer, which is still around. And I think that still has a lot of these older models on. And the older models that weren't as sophisticated or didn't have as much training data will produce a lot of quite artistic and poetical and very strange text. And you can't get the modern LLMs to do this. And I have tried that. If you say to ChatGPT 4 or something, pretend you're ChatGPT 2, it just can't do it. It won't be able to do it. But if you can get hold of smaller models that are more poetical. And a lot of people have said this, that the older models are much more fun because they come up with weirder stuff and stranger material. So have a look at, I'm pretty sure TextSynth still has a lot of the smaller models on it. And I think it's free to use. I did use it for research a few years ago, but I haven't used it much recently. But you had a big list of, all sorts of different models. And like David says, temperature, there are settings which you can adjust to make things go even stranger.
Interesting. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any more questions? Like I say, feel free to either raise your hand or just unmute if I don't see it. Okay, Toby, I've got your question here. Do you want me to ask it or do you want to ask yourself? I will ask on behalf of Toby because his mic doesn't work. Fascinating works. I'm curious, where do you think these methods of experimentation are situated in a wider methodological perspective? So that is the question. So I guess we're looking at this new way of artists have always experimented, and digital artists have always experimented with digital technology. How do you contextualize what you're doing in that sort of bigger picture?
Is this a general question to both of you?
It is, yeah.
Okay. Well, if you can go back to Burroughs and the Beats, who we're interested in. Can everybody hear? Is that all right? My volume keeps on going up and down for some reason. The whole cut-up technique is very old, and there were text randomizers going right back in history. But the most recent post-war scene would be the Beats in America with cut-up fiction. Burroughs, the idea of deranging it's kind of authoritarian and rigid post-war system in America to sort of escape from all that boredom by just changing things. So I'd say that's part of it. And this idea of randomizing, just coming up with unexpected things, has been around from then, I guess.
Yeah, but there's a much longer history, naturally, of
Sure.
mechanical
Yeah.
text generation that spans back to the works of Raimundus Lullus in the
Yeah,
13th
sure.
century.
Yeah, no, I have all this on my website, all the history.
It's a very long, I mean, for a very long time, I think people have tried to understand what the brain was doing. And the easiest way to try to understand this is by externalizing the brain content and trying different things with the words in mechanical ways. And if you happen to find a mechanical system that generates meaningful text, which already happened back in the 12th century BC with an oracle device named the Zairja that created a rhymed answer to any question posed, then you would obviously have understood something about the brain. The irony nowadays is now we are able to simulate the brain in quite a perfect or a surprising way, I should say. And but the processes by which this takes place, because these are all neural networks, are completely opaque. We don't looking at a neural network generating intelligent text doesn't say you more than, say, the EEG of the electroencephalogram of the brain while it thinks. So we have now the processes to completely externalize thinking, but we still don't understand thinking because the processes by which we externalize thinking are completely not understandable. It's just numbers that have with no intuitive understanding.
I have another question here, but if I could make a comment on that, which is I tend to now think of AIs, artificial intelligence, as really simulated intelligence, because I think it reminds us that even though it might appear to be intelligent, it is a simulation. It's not saying anything about how we think, I don't think. It's simulating, just what you were saying there. I wonder, would you agree that the way in which a machine thinks need not be the same as which a human thinks? And it is a simulation, not necessarily a representation of the same process?
What can be said is that the output of both system, the brain and the large language models, are amazingly similar. What the basis of this is can hardly be said. I don't know if by any means we can deduct the structure of the brain from the structure of a large language model. I don't think so. I don't think this is necessarily needs to be the case. But to be able to create meaningful output, the large language model needs to model a lot of things to be able to predict the next probable token, as they say in the large language model. It needs to learn a lot about human utterances, human language, syntax, semantics. It needs to create a kind of word model to be able to express what it expresses. So it's not sufficient to say that this is only generating the next token and it's purely statistic and it's only a simulation. I think the surprising effect that one shouldn't deny is that if we talk to ChatGPT, it feels like intelligence. And I don't want to say that this is real intelligence. I also think we are not at the end of the development of intelligent machines. Already Alan Turing predicted in the 50s that we will have intelligent machines at some point. But I think that this surprise should be taken into account, that these systems seem intelligent from outside.
Interesting. There's a big conversation to be had here. I would still say they're simulating. because we can't yet say that they're intelligent, but they're very, very good simulations. They're like maps that are almost as detailed as the territory. One of those
Exactly.
analogies.
So
Yeah.
one other thing is that the first neural net was the perceptron in the 40s, which of course was modelled on a neuron. So that's where it all started. And then, so of course what you have now is a kind of simulation, as you said, Sean, of a brain. But it's not the same as a brain at all. It doesn't do things in the same way. But it was initially based on a technique that was grounded in biology, not in maths and computer technology.
I sort of adhere to the Turing view, which is if the simulation's good enough, you might as well say it's intelligent. You know, if the Turing test, you pass it, you might as well say it's intelligent. But there's a lot surrounding that. I do need to get on to another question here, actually, from Tim Pickup, which is a very interesting one from Genetic Moo. Do you see a place for the computer code itself as poetry?
Well, I did a program in 1984 called Carry On Computing, the inside of a computer, which is kind of like a visual poetry, I'd say, of code, because it wasn't images, it was all with computer code, and various commands would appear on the screen in a kind of crazy way, along with some beat. I do see what you're getting at, Tim. So I think there's an area between code and art that's of interest, yeah, and maybe not poetry so much, but certainly visual arts.
David, do you have any thoughts on this one?
I didn't understand the question. I'm sorry.
So, do you see a place for the computer code as poetry?
That's a difficult one. There are there are. I mean, the closest. I think the closest you get is in the invention of artistic programming languages. There are a lot of programming languages that don't try to be effective, but they try to be as obfuscated and scrambled as possible. So there are programming languages, for example, the Manchester Code. The people in Oxford said the Manchester Code represents the rain in Manchester because it has a lot of slashes in there. And so in the same way, people create programming languages that consist of brackets and slashes and all kinds of pictorial elements that look very funny but execute as code.
And then there's Paul Prudence.
There's a website on that.
There's somebody called Paul Prudence who's done a talk at CAS before, who does typewriter poetry, where an art where you type on sheets of paper with all these characters. And it's similar to what you just said, David, where the visual output is what he's typing for, not the meaning, just the patterns and density of characters and so on. So this is that area where the visual side of it is important.
Well, I would say there is such a thing as beautiful code and elegant code, and there's such a thing as ugly code. So maybe that is space for poetry within that. Yeah.
Definitely, there's an aesthetic quality to coding, and also an aesthetic obsession with coding.
But of course, copyright applies to code. You know, in the old days, your code is copyrightable in England. The actual words of the code, not the program outputs or anything like that, or even the concept of the program. The actual code was copyrighted, so you couldn't steal code from people.
It doesn't help because it has been shown that large language models can easily take existing code and turn it into their code by simply rewriting the code, so you can circumvent any attempt to create a copyright like that quite easily nowadays.
Sure.
It's the same like with watermarks. Watermarks used to be a sensible idea to protect copyrighted work, and nowadays you talk to a large language model and tell it remove the watermark.
Yeah, sure.
Tim just mentioned ESO-langs, which I think is this whole world of esoteric languages.
I think that's what I meant. That's how it's called.
ESO-lang. I know that term. Do we have any more questions? Have you got time for one more? Otherwise, I think we're about there. I don't know if you wanted to say anything at the end, Geoff.
I just got a quick question for David, which is when you were showing the poetry generator and the installations, What did the public think of it when they came along and had the ghost keyboard and then it stopped and they used it? And did they read the text? And was there any way to print out the text so they could take sheets home? Was it on screen?
No, it's purely on screen, and the text also is not kept. So people cannot keep the text, but people have often used Poetry Machine against my will, I have to say, as an oracle. So I find people in the room with a notebook, putting things into the computer keyboard and then writing down the answer as some kind of oracle. So that's quite a typical situation. The other typical situation is people in the room somehow distracted, and suddenly the ghost keyboard starts to move, and they are really frightened and shocked that something suddenly moves.
Yeah, no, it must have been a very interesting experience. That whole. You should have a show in London.
Poetry Machine was never shown in the UK. I just found out. I just saw.
Wow, that's an interesting one.
Love letters, yes, but Poetry Machine, no.
Okay.
Okay, well, I think that's been fascinating. Thank you both very much.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for your interest.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Our next event is in June, where we have exhibition and talk, which will be, I'm sure, online, from Genetic Moves. So that should be very exciting. So just keep an eye on our social channels, Computer Arts Society social channels for that.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, John, for helping out with organising.
No problem. Yeah, thank you both very much indeed.